We have much less of a relationship with nature, with each other, and with our Creator, because the cosmic God, as we know it, is kind of like the mystery of God, and we only can know that through silence, through the whisper that comes through in silence. Nature, of course, we have to be with. We have to go out and be with nature, and then we have to be with each other in a more intimate and more close way, and people are more interested in often being on the gadget than being present or attentive to people maybe sitting down having a meal with them right at the table. So I think, when we study, again, where is health the best in the world, none of those areas are technologically advanced. Sardinia, Icaria, Okinawa, all of these pockets around the world, people are still living fairly simple. They're having meals together. They're eating from the earth. They're celebrating life. They're celebrating aging, the wisdom of our elders. And yet we keep thinking that we're in a hurry to get somewhere, but we're really not.
And where
Now,
is
back
that?
to the nervous system in my lectures, and now the other thing we're learning is a lot of the traditional herbs used to support the nervous system are great at also inhibiting cancer. So my talk has been on looking at and exploring herbs like lavender. You would never
Yeah,
think
it's wonderful.
lavender, kava, St. John's wort, the sacred plant St. John's wort, Poriococcus, magnolia, ziziphus seed, skullcap, passion flower, all of these plants that have traditionally been used to kind of taper the sympathetic nervous system, and Rauwolfia. Rauwolfia is shown to be inhibitory to ovarian cancer, pancreatic cancer, prostate cancer, potentiate chemotherapy, and it's probably the strongest herb in the world for quenching the sympathetic nervous system.
So instead of a beta
Yeah.
blocker, you have a product called Tranquility. Is that something you would recommend, or is
I
it
use
more?
Tranquility, and then the one with Rauwolfia is the cardiotonic, actually. But then also practices, meditative practices, getting people aware. Again, awareness is always the first step, and then the desire. So you actually petition. Once you're aware, then you have to petition. You have to say, I actually desire to change my behavioral patterns, because it's very difficult.
Well, it's prayer.
It's
Really
very difficult. Yeah, it's getting
prayer
attuned
and
with your
right.
spirit and not your emotional self. It's moving beyond the emotional patterns that are ever prevalent in and how we live our lives, and getting to even a deeper place, another layer. And it's sort of the beauty of growth and life, is to get to those layers.
Well, you do it. People say body, mind, spirit. You say spirit, mind, body.
Right.
So, what do you feel the soul's role is even in illness or in life? I mean, we're not that in touch with our souls, or many of us aren't, because we're running, and you need quiet to be able to get in touch.
Yeah, well, I often say that we're not, the embracement of medicine and ETMS and Radiri is not survival tactics. That's not the role that we play. I do feel that somewhere, with the relationship with plants and with my relationship with people, and also the growth that people have by embarking on a healthier way of living, ultimately brings us closer to the source of our spirit, of our soul, which is basically a source of love. It's an ocean of love, and getting to that place where we can have that, abundance of gratitude, kindness, loving kindness, and even in the wake of suffering, still have that, be ever present, and I think that everything is an opportunity, to actually experience that, and then get a little taste of possibly drawing heaven to earth, because that's the ultimate goal.
Right.
Is to what is if you were to say, how do I imagine heaven? I definitely imagine nature to be a part of heaven.
Yeah.
It's too beautiful not to be.
It's magnificent.
And so everything. So by choosing to have an intimate relationship with plants, by actually ingesting them, to me is very spiritual. And more so than it is physical. So for my personal reasons are even grander than the fact that, yes, I think we can get this issue resolved with this or that, but it's also, hey, the plants are actually living inside you, conveying information to your genes, and it's very, very beautiful. And when I go back to the first book I read, Back to Eden, well, again, that book is about crude herbal medicine, but just the title, Back to Eden, just the sense that there is a whole pharmacy out there, and modern medicine looks at that pharmacy every day, but to manipulate it and isolate it for the good of their ego.
Exactly, and that's what you're
not to respect
doing.
it. So the same people that say that, oh, herbs don't do anything, well, why is 65 to 70% of all chemo drugs from plants? Why would that be? And you say herbs don't do anything.
And most practitioners, doctors, don't even realize that it actually comes from Mother Nature.
Yeah.
So it's every thought we think, what we put in our body, the moments we take, all of this kind of comes together for our relationship with our soul.
That's what I
think.
think.
We all have one,
Yeah.
and it's actually really wonderful to become acquainted with it.
It is. It
It's
is.
pretty incredible.
And not to be ever afraid. Not to be ever afraid.
And this leads me into getting older and dying, because our culture is so afraid of that, unlike a lot of other cultures, that we try to keep people alive and do things that are not always necessary for the end of life, where people can kind of contemplate and have a graceful kind of a transition. And then we feel bad if we're dying or getting older, and that our whole relationship with that aspect of being here is we're not aware of it. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? And
I almost think that we're going in the opposite direction. I think that we're doing all we can to physically alleviate pain and suffering of death, so much so that often people are actually, given enough medicine that they die. They wouldn't die sooner than they naturally would. They're basically, in that last few days, they're basically given enough benzodiazepines and morphine that it basically puts them asleep. And so physically, we keep thinking, well, but spiritually, what are people going through? They're suffering immensely, immensely with death. Death is very, very painful because it's such a, we're so uncertain. And then our whole life comes before us. And if our life has no reflection of what we're preparing for our death, which everything about our life now should be a preparation for that, so that the two should not be exclusively separate from one another. They should just be part of life, And like I said, I call it an ascension rather than a transition or a death. It's an ascension. We're ascending into a place of more beauty and more love, where there isn't suffering anymore. And so, and whether that's true or not, nobody knows exactly what happens. My choice is to believe that, and regardless of what happens or doesn't happen, it is very much molded who I am and my belief, and I'm happy because of what I believe, knowing that there is a great mystery to death as well. There is certainly a lot of uncertainties about it, but I do believe that our life here has meaning to what that and how that whole ascension occurs. And so I think the more that we pay attention to our life in its relationship, to that time, because I think that life and death are one and the same almost. Birth and death are one and the same.
Right.
It's
coming
not
in or going out.
The coming and the going.
Right.
But of consequence, as they say, of consequence is how we choose to live.
Right.
And how we choose.
And if there's an awareness
choices.
of death, then every moment's going to become more precious. If our ego takes over and we want to think it's not going to happen to us, then we're just going to kind of push forward.
And often, say from a Christian perspective, the greatest thing that you could do on the face of the planet is lay your life down for someone else. Total sacrifice, is to do that. And that's not something that feels good. So separating what is emotionally always good from what is spiritually good is also really important to do. There are a lot of choices that people can make spiritually that don't emotionally necessarily feel good. It doesn't feel good to do certain things, but underneath that is a deeper sense of joy, deeper than what you could gain even from an emotional sense of joy. So there's also another place of joy that is even greater than just how we emotionally feel joy. So, and often I lived with a priest, Father Philip, that said the number one way to get rid of your problems is to involve yourself with somebody else's problems and see that your influence on them was positive. And then all of a sudden your problems start going away.
Which is service.
Service.
Which is really the reason
Yeah.
we're here.
Yeah.
Ultimately, right?
It is. I do.
To respect
Yeah.
ourselves and honor ourselves and do service to ourselves. But I always
Yeah.
say that be selfish, give to someone else because it feels great.
That's right.
It's a gift to us.
Yeah, it is.
So recently you had an experience, which
Mm-hmm.
we don't have to go into a lot, but I know it kind of changed the way that you were operating. And out of that came this oil of anointment, which I'd like to, anointment oil, which I'd like to talk about as well.
In this time, which was over Good Friday and Easter this last year, I learned some things. You know, there was a lot of suffering. I've never physically suffered in my life once, and so it was really interesting to actually experience physical suffering. But also at the same time feel a sense of joy and love. That's why I said, you know, it's so unbelievable when you can feel love through suffering. It's
You were
a
able
whole
to
other
do that?
living. Oh yeah. Yes.
Because of your faith?
Perhaps that contributed. I think so. But again, I don't know exactly why, but it is where I came to in this experience was a place of immense pain and suffering, but also a place of love and joy. So much that personally, it made me want to be and do even better in my life, you know, and then also believe how much better the world could be if people would only believe a little bit of that, you know, and how much of what is going on is so unnecessary, you know, and that we all have to do better, you know.
Yeah.
I really came to that conclusion that we all can do a little bit better, including myself, you know, and so that came out of it. And one of the things, for example, was that I am so obsessed with studying cancer and studying science and becoming more knowledgeable, both for the knowledge itself, but also that when I do converse or go to a hospital and lecture to oncologists, that they walk away saying this guy knows more about our field than we do, which normally they say, and that doesn't happen by accident. And so then by me knowing all of the cancer drugs that are out there, all of their mechanisms, all of the pathways of cancer, then when I open my mouth and talk about herbs, I have the respect. And so I'm very much want to constantly learn. But what I learned through this experience is that I was going too far. That I wasn't studying my older books anymore, which I wasn't doing anymore. The ones that taught me the wisdom, the ones that taught me really how herbs work in the body. So I felt almost as if I was sinning in a way. So now every day I pick up one of my old herb books and study the herb the way it's meant to be studied by people that worked with a plant for 50 years and knew it intimately well, not some journal paper on an animal study on a plant compound that I read. Yes, I'll still keep doing that, but I won't do it at the expense that I need to continue to gain wisdom. So that's just one of the little things that I came. And then the oil of anointment, I learned of how painful death is, you know, and how important it is. And again, going back to that, we've done a good job relieving physical pain in some, but nothing spiritual pain. And I learned that people need to be prayed over, sung, held, both for us living still and for the dying.
Right.
Again, we need to experience it with them.
Right.
Because then all of a sudden we're not afraid anymore.
Exactly.
You know, if you're never there present with it, it's such a surprise to you. And you just watch somebody that's asleep die. You're not really there comforting them. You don't know how to comfort. There's nothing, you know, they're not aware anymore. And you want to be aware. You know, you want to be comforted and loved. And so I was given the importance, it was shared with me the importance of anointing people with sacred oils. And in the oil of anointment is St. John's wort, Hypericum, which is named after John the Baptist, because it both blooms on the feast day of John the Baptist, but also the color red that comes out is a blood-like color, and John the Baptist was beheaded, so it was given that name. Wow. But it's the most important herb to the nervous system. So there's this St. John's wort oil, but the essential oils are all the sacred essential oils. The sacred frankincense from Somalia, which is the most... All of the traditional incenses around the world are based in frankincense. And then there is myrrh, which again always goes with frankincense. You have frankincense and myrrh. And then you have rose, which is the quintessential scent of love and joy. Matter of fact, I'll tell a quick little story of a woman that was diagnosed advanced cancer in the hospital, definitely dying in the hospital, but yet body scanned, all these things are being done to her, pricked and poked and everything, and she's miserable. Oh. And then somebody opens the door and brings a dozen roses to her. For the first time in days sitting in a hospital bed, she actually smiles. It's the first thing that brought healing to her, was the visual to see a dozen roses at her doorstep. The next thing that happened was they were brought over to her, and what did she want to do? Smell them. The smell of the rose gave her a second smile. Of all the efforts that was being done in the hospital to do something healing, it was the rose twice that brought her some peace. Wow. And so the rose is is the symbol of joy, and lavender is also this lifting of the spirit. So rose and lavender were the other ones. The sandalwood is grounding. It's a more grounding, sacred scent. And then nutmeg is the scent that's in there from the tree. So you have tree, you have flower, you have leaf, you have root, and so you have all these aspects of nature sort of balanced in the oil of anointment, and all of the oils have symbolism. And then there's the Tulsi essential oil, which is the holy basil, which every Hindu home in India has a holy basil on its altar, because it symbolizes immortality. It's the incomparable one, it's called. That's what the word translates into. So it's very, very revered for its spiritual benefits. It's lifting up of the Shen, or the spirit, but it's also, I consider it a primary adaptogen as well. So that was designed both for all people to use, for blessing, for lifting their spirit, making them again aware of their spirit in them, which we all need to be reminded. We all need to harmonize our spirit. It's also for anyone suffering with illness that could use healing. And then ultimately it's for people in transition. It's an oil of unction, sacrament of unction, to bless people with. So you would bless people who are transitioning with this oil? Definitely. So does death have to be painful? You said it was painful. I mean, is it our relationship with it as we know it now, or is it just that transitions are challenging and this is a transition? I think it's always got a painful aspect to it, because you feel the pain of life, the pain of our planet, and the choices that we have made that may not have been aligned with our Creator, and then you feel the choices that the world is making every day, and how God is so pleased by acts of charity and love, both as us as individuals, but even more so as us as a unified whole. So when people actually choose to work together for a greater good, it's I think even more impressive, because it's so difficult. We all, it's so difficult because as individuals, we all have ego, and we have so much, and so we're able to put aside so much and actually work together. I think it's even more pleasing. So when someone... And I think music is very pleasing. Well, it's the last sense to go. It's so comforting. It's so important, I think, all the time, but especially at that last ascension. I'll use your word. I think instead of being hooked up to machines in a hospital, to be at home or to be around nature and your loved ones, and possibly with the natural herbal painkillers would be, to me, a much better way to
to exit. In my mind, I
agree.
would prefer that.
I agree.
And I think people need to know that they can get pain relief also, right? Wouldn't you say that a lot of these herbs can alleviate pain?
Yes. Yeah, and a lot of, I
Cordalis
mean, yeah, Cordalis is the pain relieving compound in Cordalis is called THP, tetrahydropalminate is the compound, and it's usually equivalent to about 40% of morphine. And it is slightly sedating, and then there are other herbs in that formula too that are also aid, but not as strong as Cordalis itself. Some work on inflammation contributing to pain, some work on blood stagnation, some work on lymph stagnation, oxygen stagnation, but then you get direct pain relief effect from the Cordalis. And I'm not to say somebody should be in excruciating pain by any means. You should always take the edge off, but the idea we've gone again too far.
Right.
You don't want someone to be physically suffering, but you also don't want them to be given such a high amount of that medication that they just blow up, everything slows down, and basically they're no longer present.
Right.
And you want to, if you can be, you want to be present.
You
with
want
that
more
transition.
of a conscious transition. And
Yeah.
again, it's kind of representative of you. It's the monk,
Yeah.
it's the blessing with the anointment oil, it's the musician
Yeah.
and the music, and then it's bringing in God's plant medicine to help us ease
Yeah.
out perhaps a little more gracefully, which would be wonderful.
I just thought of the image of in the movie Phenomena. I don't know if you ever saw that
No.
movie, but when he took a bite of the apple, and they each took a bite of the apple, and he says it's happening now, meaning that he had he's dying basically, and how beautiful it all happened
It
in
all
that
is.
movie. And it's a great movie to see. You know, he was
Okay,
kind
I'm
of
gonna
struck
watch
by
it.
some light, and it changed him and accelerated his ability to use his brain and do great feats like raise spoons off the counter and just be able to problem solve at an accelerated rate. But everyone always saw what it did to his brain and the extraordinary things he was able to do with it, but nobody saw that it moved his heart more than anything else. They missed that piece of it because all he wanted to do was help people. After that, everything was about helping people.
So you've shared so much, and your vision is incredible. And I know that you're raising funds for Mediri, which is to me the most worthwhile organization. But your wish for the world, and you said it in a lot of different ways, but I don't know if we can sum it up, your desire, your vision.
Well, there's two ways I sum it up. One is just here present with you right now and just taking it one step at a time and knowing in the littlest ways that the world is changing. I mean, one of my big mentors is Mother Teresa, and she's always reminding me of just, stone by stone. That's the St. Francis thing, basically, stone by stone. But she's like a pebble in the ocean. Just keep working at on the day-to-day stuff, and that might be what I'm called to do. I don't know. I do put it out there that if again I am blessed with funds to come in to do more, I'm all prepared to take it to each level that it needs to go to. I have the vision to carry it through all the way to impact, in a grander scale if possible, whether it be building education centers, schools, whether it be, now taking the Ohio State and going even further. We have opportunities now with the Children's Hospital of Orange County to do 2 clinical trials. I've put proposals
so
together
exciting.
to do one, which I call a piece of cake one, which is basically helping children offset side effects of chemotherapy, most notably stomatitis, which is immensely
What is that?
problematic. That's where children get mouth sores
Oh,
and they can't eat, and then their health goes way down. They suffer, and it's very, very common in pediatric oncology. And it's so easy to take care of with herbs. And so that's one trial we're looking at doing. Another one is the children, again, that have failed and are now in palliative care, meaning that they're just giving doctors best choice to, see if they can extend their life but not cure. That then we would combine that with botanical medicine to see how much more significant the impact can be, both quality of life and longevity. And I'm hoping that some of these trials we can also compare just cost savings to the model too, because that's the other thing that I want to really be able to demonstrate.
The oil of anointment can be used daily. If you're not feeling well, it can be applied to an area of the body that's in distress. and also at the time of transitioning, ascending.
Yes, and with the oil of anointment, so that was one of the things that kind of came after this, this experience that I had at that time, that the illness that I had. Other things that happened, that I talked about the change in attitude for me to be sure I go from my heart to my head and not my head to my heart.
Right.
And then there were a few things that, like, I would say messages that I was left to. One was that the importance for me, and I think for the world, of Pope Francis's presence. And because I came out of this reading his homily, from his Easter homily, where he talked about entering into the great mystery of the unknown, which we can call God. We're required the ability for your mind to wander and ponder, and then to seek silence. And then in the midst of silence comes the whisper of God, and to always pursue after truth, beauty, and love. And that one of the most important characteristics, which I talked about in the humility of medicine and herbs and the glamorous of medicine and drugs, that humility was a very important thing for all of us to be seeking in a world that basically everyone's self-promoting and doing more to boast upon themselves. That I think one of the impressive things was humility, and that for me it was very personal. And that John Coltrane was like my favorite musician of all time. Big sound, lots of notes, explore, very spiritual. But what I heard in this time was the most humble of musicians, Charlie Hayden, playing the bass, because he played with such humility. And so I really learned the importance of humility as well, and felt that was really important to share. And the last thing was this, all of the how many people are so confused about what to eat and how to eat. As a matter of fact, when I do dietary lectures, I open up with the book, Are You Confused? Because people seem to be very confused. And then everyone's saying, oh, don't eat grains, don't do that. And so I was given that from God, that the most important food for people to eat was bread. And there were several reasons for that. One, again, is that it represents humility. It's the most humble of foods in the world. It's peasant food. A poor person and a rich person can make really healthy bread the same way. God would never have a food that only rich people can get. You go all around the world, and one of the first things you do to introduce yourself in a kind and loving way is to present bread. It's just one of the things that we do. So culturally, it's a very significant food all over the world. Traditionally, every tradition eats bread, and has bread as part. We sit down at the table, it binds us together. We break bread together. We don't break broccoli. And then spiritually, God is referred to as the bread of life, and there would be no Jews if it wasn't for bread. What did God leave in the desert and for the Israelites?
Matzah.
Manna. Bread, bread.
But what kind of bread? Because there's all,
Well, I like everything to be whole and heirloom, meaning unadulterated. So
okay.
I've been sharing people about kamut, because kamut is one of the oldest of all grains, and it's the ancient grain. In King Tut's grave, they found kamut, and it's highly nutritious. So, for example, as an heirloom source of wheat, one of the ones that I like and I like working with, which is kamut. And the other factor of bread and of whole grains is that it can nourish the world and have very little impact negatively on the environment. All these other foods people eat, raising organic cattle and all of this, it's impossible to have the whole world sustain health as a world eating those foods. It just costs too much.
Right.
It's the impact on the environment's too hard, but grains have no impact on the environment. I'm just sharing with what kind of came out of this experience with me. And so I've written about that. I've had blogs about it. I've given recipes to people. Not that, your diet should be all grains or anything. It should always be balanced and whole. Diet should always be based on your traditional eating habits, what your taste buds like,
right.
What is seasonal, what is adaptive to the area of the world that you live. How you eat on the equator and eat in Alaska are two different places. Your energetic profile, do we need to nourish your yin essence? Do we need to, which is naturally salty foods? Do we need to nourish your spleen energy, which is warming aromatic foods? Do we need to nourish your liver or cool your liver with cucumbers and watermelon and bitter greens? So there's the energetic quality that food offers as well. Then you look at conditions you may have. You may have gout and high and uric acid. Then you do lots of celery, black cherry juice, stay away from red meat, shellfish, and alcohol. You could have kidney stones. We do a diet for that. The diet needs to be so adaptive. Then you can look at what's called Nutrigenomics, which is the relationship of food and food compounds with our genes. So if you're not if you have BRCA mutation, eating healthy vegetarian, more fruits and vegetables is useful, to inhibit turning on the epigenetic expression of that inheritable gene that you may have. And so there are all kinds of ways of taking diet and personalizing it. And that's what I try to do.
So morally, environmentally, the whole meat industry, I know for myself, even though I love the way it tastes, ethically, I just am not comfortable anymore. And it's not working, really.
Yeah.
So you're saying that bread, manna, is life as long as it's healthy and organic and non-GMO and hopefully not sprayed with Roundup.
And I think, yes, and I think a lot of people say, I feel better not eating grains, because they're eating healthier. Because what they were choosing to eat before was unhealthy, for one. And also, one of the roles of grains is that it holds moisture. And so when people eat lots of grains and they drink, they blow it up and they think it's basically fat or poor digestion. It's basically just lots of water in your stomach, because you're just basically the grain is absorbing the water. And so if that's uncomfortable, then you're just doing too much. And then some people become, because of eating poorly so long and their bodies being so out of balance, carbohydrate intolerant generally. And that's not the fault of the whole food. If you're eating whole foods, it means that we have to make your metabolism better. Body. You're not utilizing those foods well anymore.
You said you had never suffered until this happened, and I just have a question. Does that in any way make you relate differently to your patients that have suffered, or no? Did that change your ability to relate to them?
I think so, somewhat. But I always had a lot of empathy for people,
seem to.
And was able to feel
curious.
what they feel. I think I could get inside of people to a degree, and again find out what buttons each person, because everyone has different buttons that we need to press in them to help them come through, and maybe see things differently, have hope, have faith, and not be stuck in a place of stagnation. You talked about stagnation, and stagnation's a really big part of cancer. It really is. You have spiritual stagnation,
exactly.
You have oxygen stagnation, you have blood stagnation, you have lymphatic. And one of the basic premises of ETMS is, how do we create movement? How do we unblock stagnation of all types?
In all areas. It's soul, mind, body, and we have to take the three of them, as equally as important, because the soul will affect the body.
Sure. Because if you're disturbed in your spirit, things congeal more physically even.
Right.
The everything contracts more, and there isn't good movement through the body.
Exactly.
And cancer is a disease of stagnation. There's no doubt about it. Hypoxia is a characteristic of a tumor, basically learning to block out oxygen and create like a nest, like a bird nest.
Right.
That's what
so
a tumor
it's energy. It's our energy. It's our vital force. It's our flow in relationship to everything, and hopefully more relationship to our souls, to nature, to love, to serving, and to being more aware of each other and community. I love, when I met you today, the first thing you said was the opening line of Pope Francis.
Pope Francis, when he addressed on Saturday night when he was in this country, in Philadelphia, I believe it was, when he was honoring families. It was this big. And the whole time he was in America, he had written most of the scripts that he had spoken. They were written. He wrote them himself, and he even edits himself. But this time he had no script. And so he opens up his talk on Saturday night like this. He goes, so before there was God, So everyone says, before there was God, wasn't God the beginning?
Right.
He goes, before there was God, there was love.
I think that like sums it up. I think that kind of says it
I
all.
think it was beautiful. And then he said 3 words that you should say every day. And one is please, the second is thank you, and the third is I'm sorry, he said. And John Wooden, the great basketball coach, brother of UCLA, most famous of all basketball coaches, and was a great, wise man. And he always says, you can never have a perfect day unless you can do something nice for somebody that can never pay you back.
Random acts of kindness.
And he also said, you never begin to learn until after you know it all.
Okay. Well, you know a lot.
And
so,
the greatest obstacle to inhibition of healing and progress in healing is not ignorance, it's the illusion of knowledge.
Oh.
That's Daniel Bornstein.
Wow.
Great quote. The illusion of knowledge. We all think we know, and we don't.
So like going back to the bread, which is simple, I think just going back to a more simple way of being overall. So how do can people get onto your blog if they're not a client of yours?
Yes, my blog is just my name, DonnieYance.com, DonnieYance.com.
Okay.
And the Mediri website is MediriFoundation.org,
We'll
all
have that
one
up.
word,
Okay.
which is really great. And you can learn a lot more about our
Donnie.
foundation and our work. And everything else you can learn about music through that website too. You can find some of the things that I'm doing musically as well.
I know that, you opened for Earth, Wind, and Fire, right?
I did a couple years ago.
That's like pretty amazing.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Now music is huge in my life.
It's so important. Well, thank you. This is just the tip of the iceberg, but thank you for
so
sharing
much,
all of
Barbara,
this with
for all
everybody.
the beautiful and wonderful work that you do
thank
too.
You. I'm so grateful. Thank you, Donnie.